Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Good to see everybody here. We have a really special event and a very special guest star today. So, you thought I was the only star? There's more stars. So, the LGBTQIA+ and Allies of Woodland Pond interest group meets on the fourth Tuesday of every month at 2 p.m. in here. And besides having discussions and events, we host guest speakers. And normally, so far, our guest speakers have been from outside of Woodland Pond. Well, not today. Today, we have our very own famous Philip Mehl is going to answer all of your questions on everything. The meaning of life.
Yeah, that's why we're here.
Everything. And after his presentation, we can have questions. I'll bring the mic around and see if there's questions. So, thank you, Philip, and welcome.
All right. So, thank you, everybody. I'm going to give a disclaimer right off the bat. I am not at the peak of health, but I heard this presentation is so good that I couldn't miss it. So here I am. Yes, my name is Philip Mehl. I'm a licensed social worker and the licensed administrator for the health center here. I also moonlight, and I have for quite some time, as a per diem consultant for Leading Age New York. That's the advocacy group for nonprofit healthcare providers. And so this is a particular presentation I've given to the Greater New York Health and Hospitals Association, as well as to some leading age conferences. It's largely geared for healthcare workers and providers, but I think there's plenty in here that still might be of interest to all of us. And despite that wonderful introduction, the first thing I'm going to tell you is I am not an expert on this topic, whatever this topic we end up describing is, and none of you will be experts on this topic. And I say that because there are so many individual variables that go into what makes us us, what makes us individuals, distinct from each other and special and unique. So we'll get into all of that. So, okay, what is sexual orientation, gender identity, and all those terms and pronouns I just don't understand, okay? So we're going to be navigating sexual orientation and gender identity in the healthcare setting. All right, any questions so far? Perfect. No heckling from my mother in a second. So what are we doing here today? We're going to learn a basic framework to better understand the potential needs of LGBTQ patients and staff, and enhance the experience of staff and residents / patients in a hospital setting. We call them patients. In a long-term care setting such as here, we call ourselves residents. Okay? And the reason this presentation is focused on staff as well as residents is because we all know that staffing in a healthcare environment is difficult. Woodland Pond consistently performs above state and national averages in terms of number of staff. And part of that is making sure that we're creating a welcoming environment, not only for people to come here and live, but if this is your choice of employment, are we honoring and respecting who you are as an individual? So that's all part of it. Okay. I will start by saying that I identify as a queer, cisgender male. What does all that mean? Okay? So I want just to take a moment and just listening to that, a queer, cisgender male. You don't have to say it out loud, but I wonder what kind of images come to your mind. Okay? What kind of attributes might you assign to someone that you hear is queer, or whatever cisgender means? So try to keep that in mind. So I'll tell you a little bit about me right now. I love to travel. I love ethnic food. All right? Second picture, that's in Norway. That's my husband. third picture, those are my biological daughters. Wonder if that was something on your bingo card for a queer person. My biological daughters and her cat. Everyone probably knows Noli by now. He's still trucking, he's here today. I love tennis. I don't know if that was on your bingo card. I'm a sci-fi nerd. If any of you like Star Trek and have not been to the Star Trek Museum in Ticonderoga, do yourself a favor and get there. The production specs are identical to that of the show. It's the most amazing thing. I'm sitting in Captain Kirk's chair. I also love old TV. Anyone remembers MASH? That's Loretta Swit, Hot Lips Houlihan. I like to go to old TV conventions. All right, so that's just a little bit of the flavor, the many flavors of who I am, just as we all have many flavors that make up who you all are. Hey, let's look at this second set of slides, or pictures. All right, top left, anyone recognize that? Les Mis. It's a Broadway musical. I hate musicals. Okay? That might be something that we automatically assign to queer people, to gay people. It's not my cup of tea. Second one, RuPaul's Drag. Never been to a drag show. You couldn't pay me to go to a drag show. Not that I don't respect it as an art form, a form of expression. It's not my cup of tea. Nothing wrong with it, not something I spend my money. Okay? What I do is, improv. I've been a member of, I have a theater background, I've been a member of an improv troupe for a number of years. I really enjoy that form of expression. I go primitive camping with a group of guys every year. That's pretty rugged and manly, right? I have the same problems everyone else does. That was a leak in my living room not too long ago. I like the New York Yankees. And I suffer from chronic migraines. So once again, just like all of us, lots of different facets, lots of different attributes, lots of different interests. It's really hard and probably dangerous for any of us, particularly if we were healthcare workers or even sitting with each other, to automatically assign traits and attributes to other people simply based on some pronouns or some categorical titles that we have. Does that make sense, everybody? All right, so now you know everything there is to know about. Don't like musicals, don't like rap. Okay. We are going to watch a quick video. This is where Dave comes on to adjust the volume. Let's hear it for Dave.
I feel often that this terrible feeling of being alone, of being ashamed, of being in the closet.
I worry that I would end up back in the closet again.
So many people go without the care that they need because they don't want to disclose, they don't want to be outed.
This video will help you learn to create a safe, welcoming experience for LGBT seniors. It will demonstrate that you are someone who not only tolerates the fact that they are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, but who welcomes them and wants to learn what it takes in order to help orchestrate their best possible health outcomes. Our country's senior population is growing rapidly, with baby boomers already in their 60s. If you work in a long-term care facility, please know that a percentage of the seniors there are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, whether or not they have told you about it. Residential care facility staff is probably committed to serving everyone equally. However, doing this for LGBT seniors means using an intentionally welcoming approach. These seniors often require a layer of trust that differs from that of non-LGBT seniors, and even differs from LGBT youth.
That would be one of the great things about having any other gay people there. I would be able to sit with them and say, what was it like for you?
In recent years, LGBT people have made significant advances within American society. Despite this, LGBT seniors often still carry trauma and fear rooted in decades of harsh repression. It's easy to forget that their experience of coming of age and maturing into adults happened in a much different time, a time when LGBT people were stigmatized. In the 20th century, fear, discrimination, and secrecy dominated the experience of being LGBT. When our current seniors were growing up, and even throughout middle age, LGBT people could legally be jailed, fired from their jobs, evicted from their homes, expelled from their churches, or have their children taken away. Many experienced repeated day-to-day alienation, imposed by people around them and even self-imposed in order to keep a job or stay safe.
We stayed in the closet because of our jobs. I was the director of a nonprofit social agency and fearful of being discovered at one point, Most of their life has probably been spent hiding in some capacity, whether it's from their landlord, their boss, their nosy neighbors, I imagine in some ways when you go to a facility, it's probably actually easier to hide than it is to be out, which is very different generationally.
I depended on my neighbors. I didn't know how they felt about gay people. And so I just hopped right back in the closet.
In the current generation of LGBT seniors, many did not have children. Because of this, and because some were alienated from their families of origin, LGBT seniors are less likely to have anyone to care for them, and are more likely to live in poverty, be socially isolated, and have unresolved health issues.
At least 10% of the population is LGBT. Even small towns everywhere has a community.
As far as I know, I'm the only transgender person here.
We have not only seniors moving into facilities where they feel like they're the only LGBT, they possibly feel like they have to go into the closet again, most likely, but they also are farther away from their communities, both physically and sort of emotionally, socially, their ties. And so they're really isolated.
In the place I live, I feel totally lonely.
That is why it is so very important to convey the message that they can be safe in opening up to you. If a resident identifies as LGBT and you are privy to that, you will then have created an atmosphere where they can be comfortable speaking freely. This is an incredibly important thing for anyone. It will truly provide a caring culture in your facility.
Okay, any reactions to this video? Sad, I heard. Yeah, sad. Those of us who've had an experience of coming out will never forget it. The challenge of it, the fear of it, the profundity of it is identity changing in every aspect of your life. And it affects every relationship that you have with every single person you know. In your family, in your friend group, in your work group. This is the risk. And people who come into communities like this, they have already experienced that coming out process, only to come into a facility and wonder, is this a place where I can safely do that again? Right? Because generally when we look around, the base assumption we make is everyone around us is straight. Okay? And there's no scarlet letters generally, and often there's no kind of visual cues. So the challenge is for us as healthcare providers, and for you as neighbors to each other, is what kind of environment are we setting in which when people come into our community here at Woodland Pond, is it a place where people can be safe to be who they are? And just when we think that we've made this tremendous progress as a society, which we have, look at the things that we're hearing right now on the news, avoiding a political discussion, but the overt comments and erasing from from employment, from public records, from passports, those who are transgender. Right? So the fear is real. And we have an opportunity here as a community to overcome that, to show that we are better than that. And the impact is so crucial. It's the difference between if someone comes into an environment like this, can they be who they are? So the questions are on us. Who do we want to be? What kind of community do we want to be? Okay, so some facts. At least 1.1 million LGBT adults in the US are over 65. I imagine it's higher than that. They are twice as likely to be single as they age, 3 to 4 times less likely to have kids to support them. 1/3 of LGBT older adults live in poverty, and twice as likely to live alone, and less likely to disclose orientation in health settings. So right off the bat, statistically, in terms of mental and physical health outcomes, we're already faced with some significant challenges. To further exacerbate, the perception of LGBT persons is that healthcare providers don't believe you were telling the truth. This is their perceptions. That healthcare providers assumed something about you without asking. That was kind of the exercise we first did when we said, what comes to your mind when I identify myself as a queer cisgender person? What am I already having to overcome in my interpersonal relationships with other people based on what they're already assuming? And 29%, as opposed to none, feel that healthcare providers have dismissed their concerns. All right, just to keep the cheer going, LGBT persons are more likely to feel depressed or down, more likely to experience worry and anxiety. All right, so there's mental health challenges already here too. So health, personal, and economic disparities exist in this group when compared to the general population of older adults. And yet there's further subgroups such as transgender and bisexual older adults, and in individuals living with HIV. And then you can even add on top of that cultural and ethnic subgroups, and you look at a mountain of obstacles to overcome. Okay, according to the report, about 2.7 million US adults 50 and older identify as LGBT, including 1.1 million age 65. They're expected to nearly double by 2060. Now, I don't know if that means as a species we're producing more LGBT persons. I suspect that people are feeling more, at least were, open to coming out. I'm also quite sure, although I don't have the data, that there's some geographical differences in that, even in the United States, where people might feel more likely to come out as opposed to other areas. About 13% of LGBT older adults report being denied health care or given poor care because of their sexual or gender identities. We're going to talk about those terms. And among transgender participants, that number jumped to 40%. This last sentence has officially become dated based on what is happening right now in terms of what will be available for transgender people to get the medical and mental health support that they need, especially when they're being told they don't exist.
Yeah.
Older LGBT adults are more likely than heterosexuals to smoke, drink excessively, and report depression. All these things that we do when we're having mental health crises. Okay, as we talked about, in addition, Hispanic and African American LGBT older adults are more likely to report having HIV than their white counterparts. That may be because of a lack of health care, a lack of preventative services available, or a lack of feeling comfortable to go to their providers because of cultural issues to talk about their sexual relationships. And just further, health exacerbations, asthma, diabetes, visual impairments. African American LGBT older adults are also more likely to be obese and have high blood pressure. Higher rates of stress, often related to systemic discrimination, that leads to higher rates, as we said, smoking, alcohol use, drug depression, loneliness, and suicide. Okay, so we as healthcare providers in New York State, currently, New York State public health law prohibits, it's written right into, I spend a lot of time every day looking at rules and regulations, making sure our policies reflect that, and making sure that we're practicing that as a facility. So New York State public health law prohibits discrimination on the basis of actual or perceived sex, sexual orientation, we're getting all this, gender identity or expression, or HIV status. A concern. Many of the funding dollars we get are federal. So if there now will be a condition on receiving federal dollars based on what our policies are, that's a real contention that we may have to be dealing with very shortly. I'm realizing just in the last 2 weeks how this presentation has changed. Okay, so responsibilities for us. At least once every 2 years, the facility must ensure that every staff member who works directly with the residents receives cultural competency training on LGBT and HIV issues. This is a relatively new law that Governor Hochul put into writing. Again, let's hope it sticks. We have already implemented the training for that. We've already begun that.
What's DAN?
Oh, what we get from the Department of Health are called Dear Administrator letters. And they call them DALs. That's their official term. You can go into the log and see the DALs based on data. Good question. So such training is developed by the DOH, but the facility's allowed to enhance it with their own training. That's what we did. The DOH training was terrible. It was very basic, very stark. We've embellished ours quite a bit. But here's the website in which healthcare workers can find that training. All right, remember this? Don't ask, go tell. All right, under Bill Clinton for the armed services, this was considered progress. This was considered a big boom. You know, sometimes the needle has to move incrementally and not all of the sudden. So, are we ready? Speaking of don't ask, don't tell, I'm going to tell you a story. But first, does anyone recognize this gentleman here? All right, this is Eddie Money. He was a pop and rock star, basically 80s, 90s. Big for a while, had a lot of albums on the charts. Anyone remember the song, Take Me Home Tonight? That's Eddie Money. Sometimes facilities or communities may look around, may look at each other and say, oh, we don't have any homophobes in our group. We're all very nice people. You know, I work with all these staff, they're great, they take good care of people, you all have dinner and activities with each other, you're all very nice. We probably don't need that training, right? My husband and I were returning from California. We had a layover at Midway Airport. We went to the bar to pass some time, as one does. And as we're sitting there watching ESPN and the basketball games and going on, whatever, on the televisions, this guy walks in a full-length leather trench coat. And he's got turquoise jewelry everywhere, and he is quite the sight, and he's coming in. And I elbowed Drew, my husband. I said, you see this guy? Drew said, that's Eddie Money. And I said, you're kidding me. No, that's Eddie Money. Before I could say anything, Drew's waving him on. Very different for me in that aspect. Eddie Money comes, he sits down next to us, and he is talking up a storm. And my husband is an expert at talking up a storm. And the two of them are talking and conversing, and they're sharing stories, and he is the nicest person you could, and people start to realize, oh, that's Eddie Money in the bar. So people are coming over and taking selfies with them and autographs, and he could not have been more gracious, could not have been more friendly. Just had no problem sharing time and his personality with his fans. As we're sitting with him and this is all going on ESPN, on one of the big televisions above the bar, does anyone remember the college student Michael Sam? He was a college football player. He got drafted, I think, to the Cowboys. He was outwardly gay, which was a big deal back then, bigger than now. He was extremely brave, and his story had already been out. And as they were announcing the draft live on ESPN, they had a camera in Michael Sam's home. And he just learned he'd been drafted to the Cowboys. And he turned around and he planted one right on his boyfriend to celebrate that he just made the big leagues. Eddie Money, rest in peace, suddenly looked at the television and said, ugh, I don't care if people do that, but they don't have to put it in my face. Eddie Money, the nicest guy you'd ever meet. Eddie Money, the most gracious guy with his time. That was Eddie Money's response. Clearly clueless that he was talking to a same-sex married couple, but that was the experience. Eddie Money would have loved don't ask, don't tell. Because when the telling happened, Eddie Money had a very different reaction. All right? And that's what we have to remember as healthcare providers when we're providing in-service and training for our staff. We can't make the assumption that everyone's okay with it, all right? We also may not be able to convince someone that it is okay, but we can certainly set our standards for behavior. Okay, now that we finished trashing poor Eddie Money, still a good song. Okay, so let's talk about getting some of the terminology right. Any questions on anything I've said so far? All right, here's where it's going to get a little didactic here. All right, we'll start with the easy ones. Sex. All right, either of the two categories, male and female, into which people are commonly divided based on characteristics such as our anatomy. All right? Sex can also refer to sexual activity or intercourse. Is this brand new to anyone? All right, that's good, because we only have like an hour. And I don't have slides to All right, sexual orientation. How people identify, that is, self-identify, their physical and emotional attraction to others. All right, common terms for sexual orientation include gay, lesbian, bisexual, straight or heterosexual, and queer. All right, and some people use other terms. We could probably come up with 10 more if we took the time. But it's how people identify themselves. Gender identity. Typically, either of the two categories, male and female, into which people are commonly divided based on characteristics generally like anatomy, all right? Most people identify as male or female. We're going to learn there are other options, right? But basically people identify as male or female, and the key here again is self-identify, right? I identify as male. If I didn't identify as male, you can't tell me that I should be a male, all right? It is a self-identification process. That can be very challenging for the rest of us. That can be baffling for the rest of us, and that's okay. All right? The fact that some of these concepts are a little mind-bending, we don't want anyone shaming themselves. Because when we do that, we don't ask questions. When we do that, we're not open to learn because we don't want to say anything because we might offend someone. Okay? And we're going to talk about how we handle that as healthcare providers in our health center setting. All right? Assigned sex at birth. At birth, infants are assigned to sex. Generally, there are some medical exceptions, but male or female, usually on the basis of the appearance of their external anatomy. Easy peasy, right? Heterosexuals are attracted only or almost only to the other gender. All right, the other binary, meaning that there's only male or female. We're going to learn more about that misnomer. But generally, binary is the idea that there are only two genders, male or female. Everyone with me? Gay, right? And most of us know this. Attracted only or almost only to those of the same gender. Right? This is not new to anybody. Bisexual, attracted both to people of their own binary gender and to those of the other binary gender. Right? Coming out, we talked about that, a figure of speech based on the slang phrase coming out of the closet, referring to an LGBT person's self-disclosure or disclosure to others of one's sexual orientation or gender identity. Some people do that in their teens, some people do that in their 20s, some people do that in their 80s. Gender, it's going to get a little mushy here. Attitudes, feelings, behaviors, and expectations that a culture associates with either male or females. All right? There's the possibility that some of you or some people may have been surprised that I don't like drag shows and I like the Yankees, because you already learned that I identify as queer. All right, so there's certain attributes that we may assign to each other based on our cultural assumptions of what people should be. All right, it's probably good practice to stop doing that, okay? Asexual, not sexually attracted to any gender. One of my oldest daughter's friends identified as asexual. I had never met someone who identified before, but now I can say I have. All right, simply not attracted in a romantic sense, in an intimate sexual sense, to any gender. They have friends, they go to parties, they go to movies, they do all those things. They're not sexually attracted nor desiring that level of intimacy. Okay? Gender binary is the idea that there are only two genders and that a person must be one or the other. William Pond is a little unusual, well, in a million different wonderful ways, but on our staff, as you've all probably experienced, we've probably had, I don't have numbers on this, but a greater proportion of people who don't identify on our staff as male or female. Right? And the fact that we have visibly seen people like this on our staff is a great tribute to how we as a community accept folks. Otherwise, they'd be less likely to come out, and certainly less likely to stay if they felt they weren't recognized, if they felt they weren't respected. Genderqueer, the umbrella term for gender identities other than a man and a woman. All right? This is where it gets even more mind-bending, right? And it's okay to say, oh wow, it's not something I've met, not something I've conceived, not something I've encountered. All right? People who identify as genderqueer sometimes consider themselves outside of the gender line. They may say, I don't identify as a male, despite what my body parts say, or I don't identify as a female. Again, the visual cues to the rest of us may be, well, Philip, you're clearly a male. But if I didn't feel that way, I'm the one who counts. Or you're the one who counts. Right? You get to set what your identity is. All right, everyone good with that? Gender expression, a person's way of demonstrating that their gender identity to others. Examples include names, behavior, mannerisms, speech patterns, dress, and hairstyle. So in other words, all of us, when we got up this morning, we said, I'm going to go to the PAC for this presentation at 2, we got dressed. We looked in the mirror. We all made conscious choices of how we were expressing ourselves to go out in public and sit in this room. We all did it. What kind of jewelry we put on, how we did our hair. All right? These are choices we made that made us feel comfortable in how we expressed our identity. We all do it. Where it becomes challenging or stands out is if I chose to come up here and give this presentation in a dress. All right? That would be more challenging. All right? But that would have been my choice of how I wanted to express my gender identity. All right? I wear an earring. That's old news now, culturally. Lots of men wear earrings, but it is a gender identity choice that I made. I wish I could say I style my hair differently, but... All right, gender non-conforming, this dovetails on what we were just talking about, refers to people whose gender expression is different from what society expects for a male or female. There are people, they tend to be younger than any of us, including myself, that intentionally will dress and style their hair, their clothes, their choices in a way where it is not immediately clear if that person is a biological male or biological female. And who's seen people like that? Where you're just not sure, all right? There is a good chance that was intentional because that person may not identify as strictly a male or a female, despite what their body parts are. All right, so it is an intentional decision not to appear as a male or a female. And that's not so they can trick us. Right? Dorothy, you got a question?
Well, that's my grandson. I was worried about not knowing how to classify it.
Oh, okay. All right. And so Dorothy was just saying that's her grandson. And I'm sure you've had some challenges and some family discussions on how to understand all that. And that's the only way it happens. When there's an open and safe enough environment and where questions can be asked, including, I just don't understand. Help me understand. I'd love to get to know you better. Help me understand. So I can call you by the right name. I can understand where that comes from. I can understand the decisions that you make. Transgender. Umbrella term used when a person's gender identity doesn't correspond with their assigned sex at birth. All right? I may have been born with man parts, but if I were transgender and identified as a female, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as I would love the rest of you to be concerned, I'm a female. All right? That's not how I identify, but that could be the case. That despite the clear physical cues, I may not identify with that. And that's where that gender expression comes in. If I identified as a female, I may make the choices to wear more traditionally female clothing, jewelry, or go to the extent of medical procedures, hormone therapy, etc., to actually transform my physicality. So it matches how I identify myself. All right, and we have male to female and female to male. It's not always that people have the resources or the opportunity to do something physical, to do a surgical procedure, to afford medications. And I'm very clear that it's going to become more and more difficult for people who want to undergo that. So what we may be seeing in our visual cues is people who are clearly male or female biologically, but their form of gender expression isn't jiving with that. All right? And as difficult as that may be for us to comprehend sometimes looking at it, imagine the perspective of the person who is doing their very, very best to be true to themselves, despite the vulnerability and the risk of expressing themselves and their gender in a way that is nonconformist and hoping that everyone around them will accept them for who they are, hoping that they'll be safe, hoping that they won't be ostracized from the table, won't be ridiculed, won't be physically assaulted, won't lose their benefits, won't lose their job. Cisgender. I open by saying I am a cisgender male, I have male parts, I identify as a male. That's what cisgender is. If you have female parts, you identify as a female, you are cisgender. All right, and that's as opposed to transgender. Everyone still with me? Great. Queer. This is also a term I use for myself. It used to be that queer was a very derogatory word. It was insulting. Okay? There's been conversations I've had with my mother, who loves me very much. At some point she said, why would you say queer? Isn't that a derogatory word? She was concerned about my confidence, my identity. Queer is a term that's been sort of repurposed by people who don't feel that I've been in relations, personal notes, but it's apropos. I was married to a woman, I was attracted to this woman. I still find myself occasionally attracted to women. Now, there's the term bisexual. For me personally, that just conjures up like pie graphs and you have to be 50-50 or 60-40 and all, I'm not interested in all that mess. I'm interested in how I feel at a given time and what happens when I see this person as opposed to this person. All right? So I use the term queer. Okay? Queer is often an umbrella term that will encompass all of what one's feeling. Yes?
Difference between queer and gay.
Difference between queer and gay. I don't find myself exclusively attracted to men.
But not so much as bisexual.
My personal feeling of, and this is only how I arrived at queer. If there are other people who identify as queer, they may have different reasons for arriving at that. For me, the term queer allows a fluidity and allows me just to be spontaneous and present in a given relationship, in a given conversation, without me feeling that I have to empirically define it. Okay, excellent questions, I love it. Okay, so gender affirmation transition. This would be the case of transgender folks, a period in which a transgender person transitions from one gender to another and affirms their gender identity. This includes coming out, perhaps changing their name, all right, their style of dress. People even change their voice. Some people with resources may hire vocal coaches, right? And YouTube has everything. But to actually change the tenor and timbre of their voice. And there's surgical procedures that can be done too. Changing their sex on legal documents, I suspect that will become very impossible. Taking cross-sex hormones and or having surgeries, all right? So it's all those things to which one person, to the extent they want to be involved or have the resources to be involved. All right, we talked about hormonal, surgical, and other medical procedures that are used to help affirm an individual's gender identity. All right, it's this person's ultimate hope to have how they appear, how their body is to them, the body that they know, the body that they're familiar with, be more in line with how they identify themselves in their soul. All right? Now that's a conflict I can intellectualize it, but I can't say I know how that feels. But boy, it sounds awful. It sounds like a heck of a challenge. Not only from the pragmatic sense, but then to hope that everyone around you is supporting you in that process. Gender dysphoria. People who experience distress at the incongruence between their gender identity and the sex they were assigned at birth. If it becomes the case that in our country that it's more and more challenging and dangerous to come out as transgender, we're going to see a lot of this. Those discrepancies and disparages in mental health and physical health outcomes are going to widen and widen. One can just imagine. Yes?
Is that a medical term accepted as a medical mental?
Yes, this is a common term for it.
There is a CBT code.
I don't know what the CBT code is, but yes, it's in the DSM. All right, pansexual. Attracted to those of any gender. wait a minute, isn't that bisexual or queer? Not necessarily, because we've already learned that there's more than a binary of male or female. So if I identified as pansexual, I may be attracted to cisgender men, cisgender women, but also those people who identify as neither male or female. In other words, I'm attracted to that person. All right? Does that make sense? Pansexual is sometimes a very challenging one to, and that's only if we're stuck that there's only male or female. If we can get beyond that there's only male or female, pansexual makes more sense. All right? It is very unlikely you will remember all these terms. All right? Phew. Right? There's no quiz after this. So what is the challenge for us? And the more I talk, even though as I mentioned this is geared towards healthcare workers, the challenge is also for us because we live in a community, right? So it's to be intentionally welcome. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means and the things that we can do. Right? Don't enter the conversation with a preset list of assumptions. All right, we talked about that, the exercise right off the bat. Let the person define themselves. Respect what you've been given. You don't have to agree or get it. Right? I look at this as a relief. Right? Because it can be, as I said, absolutely mind-bending if we don't understand all these terms. We may not understand what's going on in an individual. And then on top of that, as we're struggling with all that to be decent human beings to each other, that we feel we have to absolutely get it. You don't. You have to be good people. Right? That's the expectation. Don't worry if you don't get it. Ask. One of the transformations that we've made in the healthcare setting, including right here at Woodland Pond, and maybe if some of you were recently, in the last 6 months, residents in the health center, we ask. We ask, how do you identify your gender? We ask, how do you identify your orientation? Wasn't that really nosy? No, and I'll tell you why. We had, true story, we had a couple several months ago in the health center. Our social worker went in to do that initial assessment, that initial psychosocial welcoming and get to know you conversation, and it was 2 women. All right, the one woman was doing very poorly, and the other woman was keeping vigil. And Jasmine, our social worker, asked her, what is your relationship? How do you identify? What is your orientation? She wept. She said, no one has asked me that before. This is a couple that has been through numerous doctors, numerous hospitals, numerous providers. They came to Woodland Pond for her to die comfortably. And when we asked, we saw them. We validated that we understand your relationship. And it means something to us. And we want to know. And we want to support it. We know that she and she are together. We want to be able to enter the room and know that this is the relationship. This is the intimacy. This is the intention between these 2 people. We want to support that. We want to meet them where they are. All right, so we can provide the very best care in understanding not just the physical things that need to be taken care of, but the emotional. All right, it wasn't I've been in long-term care quite a while now, and it was very much the norm when Sally and Jane were roommates and best friends forever and living in the same, that's all we would assume and that's all we would ask. Right, and very likely Sally and Jane were more than roommates. Right? But because we didn't ask, we showed we didn't care. And by us not asking, there was the very real danger that the person sitting in the bed is wondering, is it safe to come out? Is this a place where I can say who I am and who this person is and what they mean to me? We ask. So we can start by learning about the different areas of transition. We talked a little bit about that. That's definitely more for healthcare providers. The implications of social, legal, physical, all of those. There's forms that have to be done, medical records that have to be updated, things like that. We'll breeze through this a little bit. Here's some pronouns. Oh, before I think there's a slide. Okay. So, let's look at these pronouns. She, her. I bet we've all used she, her before. All right? He, him. All right? Look at this person. He has earrings on. All right? He identifies as he, him. I am calling him he, him, despite the fact that he appears to have lipstick on and earrings. We ask. Because the physical appearance may not be how that person identifies. Now, will we slip up sometimes? If the visual cues are contrary to what we are used to, will we slip up sometimes? Sure will. Can't tell you we won't. Can't tell you you wouldn't, right? But boy, we can make the effort. We can strive to do and say, I am so sorry. They, them is a pronoun many people use who don't identify in the binary of male or female. All right, so these people may choose to go by they, them. And I used to see ze or more, similar to they, them. I don't see that as much anymore. Anyone else seeing that one so much? It kind of rose and fell. But again, the key to the pronoun is don't rely just on the visual cues. Ask. All right, so what we can do. We've already said, don't assume everyone in your facility, everyone on your table, everyone in your wing of where you live is straight. We participate every year, with some tremendous help from the gentleman in the back, to receive the branding of the Healthcare Equality Index. It's a subsidiary of the Human Resource Campaign. There's a set of criteria that they set out every year. They have some off years that we strive to meet as a facility. Our policies, inclusive and non-discriminatory of gender identity, sexual orientation. Do we give training? Do we have resident services and support if someone wanted to come out, or if we are already aware that someone was not a cisgender male or female? Our employee benefits and policies, we're working on that one. And resident community engagement, something else we're continually working on. I'll talk to Sue, who's an absolute truth. What does our activities calendar look like? What does the activities calendar look like over here? How many opportunities are there for someone for media, movies, discussion groups, books, etc., that are not just solely geared or based in heterosexual relationships? Okay? A lot of the challenges that we have. Visibility and physical environment. If my husband and I walked into Woodland Pond, never been here, and we're considering living here, what kind of visual cues am I getting? All right? If I went over, as I just said, and looked at the activities calendar, are there any cues on there that this is an opening, welcoming, inclusive place? What kind of literature is on the tables in the waiting room? Is there a pride flag hanging somewhere? Without any of these visual cues, it may tell me, I don't know if this is a place or not where I can come in, where I can be myself. All right? If you walk right in, the doors to the health center say this is a safe and welcoming place before you enter. So that tells you right off the bat. When you sit down, you have your first assessment with us, we ask. We're doing our best, we've got miles to go. But what kind of visual cues are we giving in our environment? What kind of policies do we have, which include sexual orientation, gender identity, and that they're clearly posted? You will not be discriminated against because you may choose the agent to make healthcare decisions for you whomever you want, including, we make it explicit. All right, because sometimes you say, of course you can choose anyone to be your healthcare policy. But if I said that to Eddie Money, he may say everyone but. Right? So making it as explicit as possible. Right? And if we have discomfort in just making it explicit, it shows how uncomfortable we are. Right? It shows that we have some more work to do to become I want an honest answer. You don't have to say it out loud, but to yourselves. If we finish this and we parade it around to the lobby, all right? If you saw a big burly guy with big hairy legs and he was sitting in the lobby with a dress on, brand new resident of Woodland Pond, this could happen, all right? What are you as individuals, you don't have to answer this, but I want you to wrestle with it. What are you as individuals prepared to do to welcome your new neighbor or not? And what was Woodland Pond, from Shannon and all the admission people on, willing to do to entertain having this person come live here? We don't know anything about this person except their gender expression. This person could be the most philanthropic, wonderful, kindest, most interesting person Woodland Pond's ever seen. We would know it if we didn't take the opportunity. All right? So a question to wrestle with. So these are suggestions for healthcare facilities. I think we should do this one. We haven't yet. Staff who've completed, well, it's going to be everyone, training in LGBTQ patient care, wear pins, stickers, or buttons that feature a rainbow flag or some sort of indicator. Again, it serves as a visual cue again. Okay? Some people have, you probably either have worked in places or have friends who sign their emails with, or some people here who choose to do it. That is an option that we offer, to have your pronoun on your badge, or to have do you have them on your badges? So it's open to all residents too? That's great. That's absolutely great. And you know what? It makes it easier for the rest of us, right? If we're not sure, there it is. Right? Because sometimes it's uncomfortable to ask, even though I'm trying to get us to overcome that very reasonable, it's the way you've been trained, you don't ask those kind of questions, you don't get involved. It's different. Asking means you care and you're interested. The absence of asking means you don't want to hear it. Don't ask, don't tell. We mentioned literature in the waiting room, reference issues, marketing, etc. We have on our website information indicating that we are a welcoming place and striving to continue to be so, if not better and better. Okay, multi-use bathroom, boy, this is in the news frequently, ridiculously. What kind of signage do we have in our bathrooms? Right? What are we comfortable with as a community? No one has to answer these questions, but these are the things that we do have to wrestle with as a community. What are we comfortable with?
Well, usually we have two that are made with
That's right.
The other one is.
Yeah, that's right. We have examples of both here, right? That inclusive language is consistently used. That's muscle memory. That's the more we use it, the more it becomes part of our own vernacular. The staff are consistently observed addressing new patients and their families using gender neutral language or using the correct and current gender pronoun. All right? I have worked hard on, I rarely will use Mr. or Mrs. anymore. You know why? I don't know. I don't know what the answer will be. And I don't want to get it wrong. It's a form of respect. Okay, that our intake forms have gender neutral language, that you don't, if I walked up to this young lady here and I said, oh, do you have a husband? Happens to be my dad, but if I didn't know that, why would I make that assumption? Probably shouldn't make that assumption. I remember when my children were little, and of course it was a different time, and we were all learning, and my father would say to my two little girls, oh, do you have a boyfriend yet? He's a mush, he's a big teddy bear. Meant nothing but love, and I said, Dad, can you not do that? Because what if, we didn't know at the time, but what if one of my daughters decided, well, not decided, only was interested in women, right? Right off the bat, from loving authority figures, grandparents, parents, we're telling you should have a boyfriend. Right off the bat, and it's not sinister, and it's not intentional. But we're already setting the table that this is how it should be. Does that make sense, everybody? There's a lot of unlearning to do, and it doesn't make us bad people. All right, so we make sure our forms have options for different names, gender identity, gender pronouns, sexual orientation. We ask for all of these things so we can get it right. Right? If no forms are used, registration staff will observe asking patients for their gender and name as it may be distinct of what's on their government ID. Oh, these are some intake forms that I suggest to healthcare facilities that won't matter here. All right, so class is in session. We are now officially in session as a community, as a group of caring human beings. How will we take what we've learned from here and incorporate it into our daily lives, into how we interact with each other, with our neighbors, with staff who help to serve and support and take care of you. So we work on incorporating change into our culture, not just for Pride Month. Generally in June we'll have a few movies and things like that. We're trying to do that. All right, establish a community that is charged with evaluating facilities' efforts and commitments. And institutionalizing a feedback mechanism for staff, residents, and visitors to use. We use satisfaction surveys in the health center for all levels of care, and there is a specific, explicit question on there. If you identify as LGBTQ, did you feel safe? And did you feel, I don't remember the exact words, and did you feel safe? Did you feel that you were recognized and supported? Did you feel any form of discrimination? Okay, so if we could do it again, how would we tell our story? All right. Thank you very much for your time. That's my presentation. I'd love to get questions. Oh, here's some resources here, but I think there's a mic right here.
I think within a couple of months that we came to live here at Woodland Pond, I realized that there is a women's tea and a men's coffee meeting. And I don't remember exactly what the topic was. And I suggested the men's coffee because I say, well, I want to see what's going on there, you know, as a member of the community. I'm particularly against kind of joining groups that are particularly identified by something. There is another topic about that, but I'm not going to talk about that. So one of the comments, I believe I proposed that, there was a topic that we were talking, and I say, well, this is a topic that we probably shouldn't be just for the men's coffee. We should have it for everybody. And somebody made a comment, well, that's a slippery slope.
Which is pejorative in of itself. A slope means going down, being dragged down into something.
Yeah, so I think that there is something, I don't know what's everybody's opinion about that. Personally, I don't feel I do it, I attend those meetings, almost not quite every week, but I'm not particularly comfortable with that division.
I think that's a great point to bring up, because it challenges some of the very things that, is it inherently wrong to have a community or an opportunity where people who identify as male to get together? I don't know, probably it was not established with sinister intent. However, if we started to look at who is welcome and who isn't welcome to this group, that might be problematic. If we started to cater the subject matter of that group based to what males like and based on what females like at the T, that's likely problematic. So I think it comes to what we do with knowing those terms. I'm going to say something also real quick. I shy away from, even though it's used a lot, the word community. The African American community, the LGBTQ community. So it's useful in some broad sociological topics, but I'm not a big fan. And it indicates that there's this cohesiveness and there's this identity that is rubber stamped for everyone who belongs to, right? So Joe and I may have some very different tastes in what we're interested in. I identify as queer. I'm not quite sure how you identify, Joe. But I bet if I looked at your bag.
I identify as gay, but we are different because I love musical theater.
So we'll wrestle about that afterward.
Yes, I totally agree with you. I hate this. I hate the women tea. Why tea and no coffee?
That's the real question.
Another matter. I don't go because I don't like tea and it's so close and I have but that's a matter. This that we separate ourselves in different communities. This is the thing that bothers me more.
Why
I personally don't belong to any community. I am Hispanic. I am so where you have your Hispanic community. But I am a human being and I agree with a lot of things that couldn't get read what is any sexual orientation of any person. This is their own business, not mine. And yes, I agree with you.
No, I tend to lean towards that also. Let me throw something out there. What if the women's tea, serve coffee also, but what if the women's tea was open to anyone who identified as female? And what if sometimes the topics at the women's tea was, what does it mean to be a woman? All right? Then it ceases to be something that is ultra-defining, ultra-conformed. So I think there's ways to explore what without stamping something as bad. I think there's room for exploration of how things can evolve and be developed. But yes, putting everyone in a community I think is a dangerous game. Yes?
Okay, just yesterday I got an email from a young friend. Salome is in her mid-30s, and she told me that her new name was Mercy, okay? And she told me that she is going to use the pronouns he, they. I'm getting okay with they, them. I understand he, him. What is he, they? Can Mercy do that?
Personally, I have never heard someone use he, they. The question, can he or they do this? Of course they can. They get to decide. That's gender identity. All right? Now, of course there's repercussions to that. And as I mentioned before, the challenges for this person are probably far more stark, far more poignant than it is for us to go, I just don't get it. We can go like this. Right, Cheyenne? Okay, I'll do it. I don't get it, but I'll do it. All right? That's all we have to wrestle with. They have to wrestle with, what is my identity and how do I relate to all these people around me and what can I expect from them? So as challenging as it is, it's really not an affront to us, right? And I'm not suggesting that you, but sometimes we can, oh, that makes me so mad. Why are they doing that? Walk away. How's your life changed? You don't have to get it.
Two language questions. Cis, perhaps I'm very dense. I imagine it to be an acronym standing for cast in stone, but I suspect that's not it. So what the hell does it mean?
I don't know. I don't know if there's a Latin termination.
Yes. It's the same. It belongs to the same.
There you go.
It's in the, no, it's not.
Is it a Latin derivation?
I guess, I don't know.
I'll talk to you later about it. The other is, if you're going to use, as it's fine by me, if you want to use what has conventionally been a plural pronoun to describe yourself as an individual, that's fine, but it begins to confuse the language in general.
Yeah.
Because you no longer are sure if you're using it in the conventional sense to describe more than one person, but in fact, more and more people are using it to describe a single person. How do you figure out when is the right time or place to use it?
Practice. So if someone comes out with and says they want to be identified as they, you make a point to do your best to say that. Right? Yes, it's not yes, it turns language on its head. Because there's a way we always said, there's a way we always did. That kind of adherence to how things always used to be also included, you never came out of the closet. Right? Also included people of color ate at a different counter. Right? I'm not at all suggesting you're saying this, Larry. But yes, it turns things on its head. Yes, it's challenging to us. Yes, systems, institutions, forms of language that we use are turned on their head. Yup. But there's been a long history of that happening culturally throughout the world.
Sure.
And we adjust.
But sometimes something new happens. We no longer have, well, we do still sometimes have Mrs. and Miss, but we mostly have Ms. And that was a word that came out of nowhere and was created. I'm sorry? What? Yeah, I know, but it didn't exist before 2000. I'm sorry?
What did she say?
My point is that in the year 1900, to the best of my knowledge, the term Ms. did not exist.
Yeah, John said it came from the feminist movement. We have another question?
Just as concerning language, Larry. Concerning language, cis, I believe, is the Latin root meaning the same. But also, also the word they and them has actually always had a plural as well as a singular sense. And if you look up in the dictionary, there's a singular. Who left their car keys on the table? The person who left their car keys should contact me about where we should put their car keys when they identify. So it's often, if you're not sure whether to say he, she, you say they. And that's always been that way, actually, in the English language. So those people who identify as neither he or she can identify as they.
That's very useful.
Two more?
Yes.
So thank you so much for this.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, I know a lot, but I don't know all of this. It's just wonderful. So I have two little things. First one is about a beautiful member of our extended family who was born female, and she's a really great artist, and she went off to study art and became Gus. And then she came home, and the parents hadn't seen her for a very long time, and apparently she had her partner who stayed home, who didn't come with her, and they found out that she was called Gus Them. And she said to her parents, well, we do that because we don't know who we'll be in the morning. So we want to have that choice. That's the part one. Part two of my questioning is, what do you think and know about teenage transitioning? Because we have, I know there's some people here, and we have a beautiful daughter now, and I just wondered if you had anything to say about teenage, especially with the events of the last a week or so.
Yeah, so a lot of the initial changes in the lives of transgender people are we're cutting off funding and recognition and service for people who are teenagers but identify as trans. So, I suppose there's a school of thought that says, oh, well, they're teenagers, they're always trying new things, and they're not fully developed human beings. And was there anyone in this room at age 15 or 16 in looking at TV, movies, or National Geographics who wasn't sure what they were interested in at that point? Probably not. We kind of knew what wet our whistle around those ages. So I tend not to think that a person is so confused about who they are and who they're attracted to simply because they're teenagers. That's about as superficial as I can. Well, I'm not trying to be superficial. I can't pretend to know what it's like. I lean towards the fact that, we're not talking a 9-year-old here, but people in their teens, from the aspect of sexual attraction, and I would imagine being the key word here, have a good sense of whether or not, through all their experiences at school, interactions with their peers, watching their family units, know if they can say, yep, I identify as that female or I identify as that male or neither. I would imagine there's a pretty good sense at that point. Is it fully realized? Does that person fully know who they are in other ways? And probably not. Some of us are still developing, hopefully. So I don't know if that was the question. I tend to defer to the person saying it. Because A, what skin is it off my back? And B, how do I know how you identify? How do I know how you feel? And why do I get to make the, I'm not suggesting you're saying that. These are my internal monologues. Why do I get to make the decision of whether you're making the right decision or not? I don't. And why would I be angry about it? I cannot understand it.
This person is 15 and will be 16 soon, and came back. She lives in Germany, and she's totally bilingual. It was an unusually learning situation. But she is now living in, oh, thank you. She is now living in Lutherville, which is near Boston, with this entity, an American entity, where we bring young people to live with a family. And she brought all her stuff with her, of course, and the family she's with is also, they have transitioned, some people in the family and children as well. So she's in a really great situation. But we knew something was up at 2 years old because she loved, she's a sister, older sister, she would dress herself in her little boy's outfit and then run to her sister's closet and put something on. And it looked great, and I thought, oh, that's great, I like that,
Yeah.
So it was already.
I would say if those of us who have non-heterosexual children or know of, there are often tells. Right? I would play dolls with my twin sister far more than I would play football with my brother. Now, was I consciously thinking of all that? Of course not. Were my parents obsessed with something? Maybe. But yeah, that helps me all the more feel that someone who's well rooted into their teens I tend to give them the benefit of whatever doubt I have. I don't say benefit of doubt on their part, that they probably have a fairly good idea of what's going on in there.
Here's a question.
Apropos of your comment about drag, she loves drag.
Which is fine. Yeah, some people like modern art, some people like the classics. It's all art to me, and I'm a supporter of art.
Here's a question.
Yes.
Okay, you said earlier that that led me to think, as a friendly person, when I meet a new person at Woodland Pond, maybe new to me, maybe they lived here, or maybe they just walked in the door, but would a friendly thing be to say, oh, and what are your pronouns?
I don't see a problem with
Would
it.
that be considered friendly or invasive?
That will be defined by the receiver. I would consider that respectful. I think that over time, that will be considered more commonplace and normal. It will be shocking to some. You might offend somebody. Your intentions were good.
As a matter of fact, thanks to our group, for free, if you want to, you can get your name tag updated. I have he, him on mine, and you have to pay otherwise, but not for this reason. You go to concierge, and you tell them, and if you want to do this, you can get them right here.
How much is it cost?
Nothing, it's free.
Oh, nothing, I like that.
I would like to say something about how much our lives have changed in understanding this. And I would think about my own experience and how I didn't really understand it at all. And then I was teaching, my first teaching job in New Jersey. I had a group that was talked about themselves as being pro. I forgot exactly what it was, pro, because we didn't have all those names then. And so I would invite one to the class. I was teaching sociology, so that they gave us the biggest insight was they didn't want to be gay. They ended up deciding they were gay and that they should make the most of it. But it was still very, iffy. And then when it came to New Paltz, of course New Paltz is a very friendly place for gay people. We brought somebody to the class, and some of the students would be pretty much offended. So now I think New Paltz is a very safe place. My grandchildren live in Northampton, Massachusetts, which is a very pro-gay place. And they're half Indonesian, where it's a Muslim country. And so the older two are just working, but the youngest went to high school, and he has determined what he is. It's sort of like, I forget which one it was, but he's neither male nor female. He likes to dress like both. And he spends an awful lot of time in the bathroom putting on makeup. And
so this person is non-binary.
He's
right?
very confident in who he is. He just started college in Boston, in an arts college in Boston, and he just feels very confident. And so it's interesting to me that he didn't go through all that fear, because his father sent him to live with his aunt in Northampton, and they're both friendly to, being gay. So I just think it's very interesting how it has moved along, and I could go on and on. So
Environment has a lot to do with it, doesn't it, Dorothy?
What?
Environment has a lot to do with
lot.
how safe it is for someone
Yeah.
to. Also, just a minute, for heterosexual people in the room, who remembers when they chose to be heterosexual?
Yeah.
No? Okay. You get my point.
It was a great day.
There was much rejoice.
Getting back to the back conversation, I think that it's wonderful that now science can help those children, that the women, doesn't matter which gente de relación adversa, that they feel that they're in a body that don't belong to them, that they can't change it. In our time, they needed to start with what they say that they were born. And I think that it's wonderful that we need to support it and to help them.
I agree.
We have one last question. The mic to Dawn.
This is in defense of the women's team.
There's been an assault on women's team.
I went to a women's college. It was very important when I was 17 to be among smart, brave, outspoken women. And I belong to several groups that are exclusively women, and they're very dear and important to me. So I think these affiliations by gender can be very precious and important things.
Yeah, and that was, thank you for saying that. You know, again, my comment was to challenge us that just the name of a group isn't necessarily problematic, but what is the policies of that group in terms of content, conversation, and welcoming? And I think those are the bigger issues. Yeah.
Well, we all learned everything we ever wanted to know. Thank you very much for